Most Belgian Malinois do not fail because they are aggressive or unstable. They fail because of a misunderstanding that quietly changes how they think long before behavior becomes a visible problem. From the outside, everything often appears normal and impressive. The dog is alert, responsive, athletic, and deeply engaged with its environment. People admire that intensity and assume it means the dog is thriving. They call it drive intelligence, loyalty, or focus. What they are actually seeing is a dog that has not been taught where responsibility begins and where it ends. For a Belgian Malinois, that distinction determines everything. This breed was never designed for ambiguity or casual leadership. It was designed to operate within structure, hierarchy, and clearly defined purpose. A Malinois does not wait passively like most dogs. It observes first, predicts second, and prepares to act before anyone speaks. That ability is what makes the breed extraordinary in working environments. It is also what makes the breed uniquely vulnerable to human error. The most common mistake owners make is confusing performance with stability. They see speed and responsiveness and assume the dog is calm and confident. In reality, the dog is learning a very different lesson. It is learning that readiness must be permanent. When owners reward instant reactions without teaching restraint, waiting becomes a failure in the dog's mind. Anticipation slowly turns into obligation. At first, this feels like success to the owner. The dog reacts quickly, notices everything, and appears almost intuitive. Friends comment on how switched on the dog seems. Trainers praise its intensity and responsiveness. Internally, the dog is taking on responsibility it was never meant to carry alone. Every sound, movement, and change in energy feels like something it must manage. This is not confidence forming inside the dog, it is pressure accumulating silently. A Malinois that is never taught how to disengage does not relax after activity. It remains mentally deployed even in calm environments. Owners often describe this as the dog being always on. They do not realize the dog has never been taught how to stand down. Many owners respond by increasing exercise and stimulation. They add more running, more drills, and more activity. For many breeds, this approach helps regulate energy. For a Malinois, it often deepens the problem. Movement without mental permission teaches the dog that vigilance never ends. Rest becomes temporary while responsibility becomes permanent. This is why some Malinois are physically exhausted yet mentally restless. Their bodies slow down, but their minds remain active. Over time, internal strain begins to surface. It appears as tension rather than aggression. Fixation develops quietly and gradually. Sensitivity increases to sound, movement, and routine changes. The dog begins reacting to things that once meant nothing. Doors closing, strangers passing, and shifts in household energy trigger responses. Owners start correcting behaviors without understanding their cause. The dog becomes confused, frustrated, and internally conflicted. It wants to obey its owner consistently. It also believes it must act independently to keep things safe. This internal conflict creates stress that owners often misinterpret. They label it stubbornness, dominance, or defiance. In truth, the dog is overwhelmed by responsibility it never asked for. It does not know how to give that responsibility back. Months pass, and the relationship slowly changes. What once felt impressive begins to feel exhausting. Leadership feels harder instead of easier for the owner. Trust becomes strained on both sides. This is the moment many owners reach the same conclusion. They say the dog is great, but simply too much. The dog was never too much for the situation. It was never taught where its job ended. When a Malinois lives in constant readiness, frustration builds inward. It does not explode outward immediately. The dog remains loyal, intelligent, and responsive. It is never truly calm. It scans constantly and prepares for problems that may never arrive. This internal tension is exhausting for a breed that feels responsibility deeply. The first signs are subtle and easy to dismiss. Recovery takes longer and settling becomes difficult. Fixation on movement becomes more intense. Sensitivity to sound increases noticeably. Owners often describe this phase as neurotic or overprotective behavior. What they are witnessing is responsibility overload. The dog believes it must manage the environment. No one has clearly claimed that role in a way the dog understands. Leadership becomes unclear even when the owner believes they are being firm. Correction increases and frustration follows. The dog starts associating obedience with pressure instead of clarity. Trust erodes quietly over time. This is where the breed's intelligence becomes a liability. A Malinois does not just feel stress, it analyzes it. It begins predicting correction before it happens. It starts acting preemptively to avoid mistakes. This is when reactivity appears. It does not come from fear, but from over-engagement. The dog is not scared of the environment. It is invested in controlling outcomes. Punishment-based fixes often fail at this stage. They suppress behavior while increasing internal conflict. The dog complies outwardly, but never relaxes internally. Obedience becomes mechanical rather than calm. Emotional volatility increases as time passes. The dog can appear perfect one moment and overwhelm the next. Owners begin doubting themselves. They try different trainers' tools and techniques. The core issue remains untouched throughout these changes. The dog has never been given permission to stop thinking. This is why many Malinois are labeled unstable or unsuitable for homes. It is not because they are flawed. They were raised without a mental off switch. No living creature can carry constant responsibility indefinitely. Elite handlers approach this breed very differently. They do not attempt to exhaust a Malinois into calmness. They teach calmness as a skill from the beginning. Action is never assumed. Waiting is trained deliberately and consistently. Neutrality is rewarded just as much as obedience. A Malinois that waits is not passive. It is disciplined and controlled. In professional environments, dogs spend more time observing than acting. They learn that readiness does not mean movement. This lesson changes everything for the dog. It no longer feels responsible for managing the environment. Decisions come clearly from above. Responsibility gains firm boundaries. When a Malinois learns it does not need to intervene without instruction, tension dissolves. The dog finally relaxes internally. Balanced Malinois often appear deceptively relaxed. Their power has not disappeared, it has been contained. They can switch on instantly because they are not always on. Their nervous system remains regulated instead of overloaded. Owners who learn this lesson late often describe it as transformative. They see the same dog with a completely different presence. The Malinois becomes watchful instead of reactive. It stays alert without becoming anxious. This is the difference between a dog that obeys and a dog that trusts. Trust is where true control comes from. The most powerful Malinois is not the one that moves first. It is the one that waits calmly. It is focused, steady, and secure in its role. It knows exactly when to act and when not to. When this lesson is taught correctly, the breed becomes extraordinary. It is no longer overwhelming or unstable. It becomes precise, balanced, and deeply reliable. This is the Malinois most people never get to see. What most owners never realize is that responsibility does not overwhelm a Malinois all at once. It accumulates slowly through everyday moments that feel harmless at the time. At first, the dog adapts without complaint. It absorbs the pressure because it believes that vigilance is part of loyalty. During this phase, owners often feel reassured. The dog stays close, listens carefully, and appears deeply bonded. What they are actually witnessing is over-investment, when the Malinois is attaching itself to outcomes rather than guidance. This is when the dog begins shadowing movement more closely, following from room to room, watching entrances, and monitoring tone changes. Owners often interpret this as affection. They feel chosen and protected. Internally, something very different is happening. The dog is expanding its sense of duty. Every routine becomes something to guard. Every deviation becomes something to correct. The Malinois begins cataloging behavior patterns: who belongs, who does not, and what feels out of place. This level of awareness looks impressive from the outside, but it comes at a cost. The dog stops resting deeply even when tired. Sleep becomes lighter and more fragmented. Recovery after activity takes longer than it used to. Stillness begins to feel unsafe. At this stage, many owners add more structure, more rules, more commands, and more correction. But structure without clarity does not reduce pressure. It increases it. The dog does not understand why correction is happening. It only knows it failed while trying to help. This is where emotional distance quietly forms. Not aggression, but withdrawal. The Malinois continues working because that is what it knows, but joy begins to fade. Experienced handlers describe this stage the same way every time. The dog looks busy but not peaceful. This is the moment where two very different paths emerge, and the difference determines the dog's future. In the first path, owners double down on control. They mistake obedience for calm. The dog becomes quieter and more rigid. Mistakes are avoided rather than resolved. Stress does not disappear in this path. It simply hides deeper. In the second path, responsibility is deliberately reassigned. The dog is taught that observation does not require intervention. This lesson feels subtle to humans, but to a Malinois, it is profound. For the first time, the dog is allowed to exist without managing outcomes, alert without burden. This is when true balance begins to form, not through exhaustion, but through relief. Elite handlers recognize this moment immediately. They see the dog physically soften. Posture changes in small but meaningful ways. Muscles loosen, breathing slows, and eyes lose tension. This is why experienced Malinois often look older than their years. They have carried weight most dogs never experience. It is also why poorly guided Malinois burn out early. Not physically, but mentally. The tragedy is that this entire process is almost invisible. There is no dramatic breaking point. Instead, there is gradual erosion, a slow loss of ease and joy. Owners often blame themselves too late. They say they should have known sooner. But the truth is harsher. They were never taught what to look for. The Belgian Malinois does not ask for less work. It asks for clearer leadership. It does not want freedom in the human sense. It wants permission. Permission to wait without consequence. Permission to stand down without guilt. Without that permission, even the strongest dog fractures internally, not explosively but quietly. This is why the most dangerous Malinois is not the reactive one. It is the one that never rests. And this is why the calmest Malinois often commands the most respect. Calm in this breed is earned. When responsibility is finally placed where it belongs, everything changes. The dog becomes powerful without tension, alert without anxiety, engaged without being consumed. This is the difference between ownership and partnership, and it is the difference most people never learn.